Well, hello and a very, very warm welcome to my channel. My name's Louise and I love waffling on about books, or musing as I prefer to call it. A warm welcome if you're a returning viewer, and an equally warm welcome if you're viewing my channel for the very first time. Well, I've had some real highs and lows this month, the first month of 2026, January. In terms of reading, I've read some absolute corkers, but I've also had some quite crushing disappointments, which I'll come on to in a little while. So, and I've read a lot, actually. I'm surprised at how much I've read, given that I was away in Vietnam and Cambodia for 2 weeks during the month of January. So in testament to that, I started off this year with my first book of the year, which is a debut novel by Nguyen Phan Mai, called The Mountains Sing. And I chose to read this because it is a novel, it's a saga, it's a family saga, I suppose, set in Vietnam, and it relates the story of Vietnam in the 1970s. Particularly North Vietnam it focuses on, but also it looks at the 1940s and 50s as well, because it's a multi-generational story. So you've got the story of Guava, who's a young girl at the beginning of the novel. She's about 11, I think, or 12, and she lives with her grandmother. So her grandmother gradually reveals her story to Guava as the novel progresses. And I just think this is it's a very good example of how fiction can provide you with real historical detail and a genuine kind of sense of what people experienced during those awful conflicts in Vietnam. And the characters are real and raw and lovable. I particularly enjoyed the storyline around Guava's parents, because at the beginning of the novel they're both missing. They've both joined up in the military, and they've gone to fight against the Americans. And yeah, they're both missing, and I don't want to give any spoilers away, but I think the story around what happens to them, and also particularly I think around her mother and her uncles, told via the grandmother, is very, very interesting, and having been to the country seems to absolutely chime with what I learned myself while I was there. And why wouldn't it? Because Nguyen Quay, oh, her name, honestly, Phan Quay Mai, my error, not hers, obviously. She is Vietnamese, so she would know, hopefully, the ins and outs of what happened in her own country. So yeah, I really enjoyed this. I think if you liked things like The Kite Runner and Pachinko, that kind of novel, this would very much be up your alley. And then I read Ocean Vuong's novel On Earth We Are Briefly Gorgeous, which fantastically sort of blends with my jumper or clashes with it. I'm not quite sure today. I love this book cover. I think it's utterly stunning. Really, it should be, going by the cover, as the sort of book you read in autumn, but there we are. This is one of the most poignant, tragic, difficult books to read that I think I've ever read in my life. It's powerfully raw and sad and unremittingly so. So I found it quite a tough experience reading it. And it tells the story of Little Dog. Again, it's Ocean Vuong is from a Vietnamese family. He left Vietnam, I think, when he was, well, certainly before the age of 5, to eventually end up in the States. And but he tells the story of his mother and grandmother, and actually, although this is fiction, I suspect from what I've read prodding about online, and what I've read about Ocean Vuong, that some of this certainly seems to be autobiographical. And it looks really closely at how his mother and his grandmother are both affected by their experience of war in Vietnam. The grandmother seems to have reacted in a very different way, even though she had to prostitute herself in order to survive. she's not come to terms with it, but she's a much calmer character than the mother. Little Dog's mother is really, really violent towards him, and one of the things that Ocean Vuong's exploring in this novel is the way that war doesn't just brutalise the people who are living through it, but actually the repercussions through generations afterwards, which I thought was very interesting to read about. He writes in the most beautiful prose. It's quite sort of philosophical in tone, I would say. And I love the way that he sort of juxtaposes war and beauty. It's done in a very sort of clever way. He looks at the opioid crisis in America. I learned loads about Tiger Woods that I had no idea about, which really fascinated me. And I love it when books send you on a little, internet trawl. I was Google searching like mad to find out all these different things about Tiger Woods. And at the centre of the novel is Little Dog's relationship with a very sort of masculine, macho American young man. And it's the opioid crisis is kind of explored through that relationship. So I love the way that he looks at masculinity, and little Dog is really badly bullied at school because he can't stand up to anyone, and so there's a lot in this novel that's exploring what it is to be male, and the pressures that are put on young men by society and society's expectations. So although it's not an enjoyable read, I think it's an utterly brilliant novel, and I'm very, very glad I've read it. Now, while I was reading those two books, I was enjoying Mary Oliver's poetry. This is a poetry collection of hers called Felicity. And I love it when I listen to the radio a lot. I love the spoken word, and I'm a big fan. And I love it when I'm listening to the radio and somebody talks about an author or an author appears, and I think, oh, I need to go out and buy that book. And that's how I came across Mary Oliver. I didn't really know anything about her. So she's an American poet, and what I really enjoyed about this collection is that it's really, really positive. So I'm going to try to it's not doom and gloom poetry. And I think this poem so resonated with me. I felt like I could have written it myself, if you know what I mean. That's a very arrogant thing to say. But I'm going to read it to you. I hope I'm going to read it to you because my glasses are over there, so this could go very wrong. In fact, I'm going to put my goggles on just to make sure that I don't mess this up, because it wouldn't be fair to her. And this poem is called The World I Live In. The world I live in. I have refused to live locked in the orderly house of reasons and proofs. The world I live in and believe in is wider than that. And anyway, what's wrong with maybe? You wouldn't believe what once or twice I have seen. I'll just tell you this. Only if there are angels in your head will you ever possibly see one. Oh my goodness. I just love that sentiment. It's so inspiring. And I really enjoyed that whole collection. And I'm hoping that I can come across some more Mary Oliver before too long. Next up, I decided, I don't know why, because I was going to Vietnam and Cambodia, but I actually wanted to read about Rome. And this is Rome Tales. And this is a series of books from Oxford University Press that I came up, I've had this on my shelves for a very long time. But I really, really enjoyed this. In fact, I made a whole video about it, so sorry if you've already seen that. And what I love about it is a collection of short stories and extracts that all focus on Rome. Told across the centuries, from the perspectives of people who live there, but also the perspectives of the tourist gaze and what tourists see of Rome. And Rome is a city that I know quite well. And I really felt it just captured so much about the city. And I will definitely be rushing to buy one of these I'm in Paris. I know there's a Paris Tales and there's a Berlin Tales. So, if I'm returning to one of those cities, I think I'll be heading off to get one of these collections, because it was great. I mean, it was slow to get started for me. The first few I read, I was thinking, oh, here we go, because quite often with short story collections, there aren't that many that I really enjoy, but there was a really high proportion of stories in this book that really got to me, and very varied, very different, very eclectic. I can't remember who. They're translated by Hugh Shankland and edited by Helen Constantine, and I think they've done a corking job. And then while I was on my travels, I don't know why, I didn't want to read about the country while I was there. It's a weird thing. It was, after all, a holiday. So I decided to take with me Daphne du Maurier's The Parasites, because I felt that this was going to be a complete contrast and it wasn't going to confuse my brain with anything that I was seeing. And the sort of trips that I go on are very fast paced. There's a lot happening. There's not a lot of downtime. So when I do have downtime, I need to be able to sleep because there's lots of early starts. And I want a book that's going to sort of make me switch off instantly. And this was just, I thought it was the perfect holiday read, actually. So obviously Daphne du Maurier is famous for Rebecca and Jamaica Inn and My Cousin Rachel, all of which I've read, and a few of her others as well. But she has got quite a backlist, and she wrote some non-fiction too. And this novel is so utterly different in terms of context to any of the other of her novels that I've read. And yet there is a familiar sort of creepiness, a familiar sort of spine tingle going on. She's just so masterful in the way that she writes. And this novel focuses on a family of actors. Well, the mother's an actor and the father is a singer, and they have 3 children, and they're very, very bohemian in terms of their sort of outlook and lifestyle. I'm trying to remember when it's set. I feel like it's sort of I want to say the 20s, but I think it's later than that. I think it's probably more like the 40s. Somebody will know and somebody will correct me. It feels like it should have an Art Deco background. In fact, is that what I'm seeing? Maybe on the, I don't know, on the thing in front. But anyway, they're married. They're a married couple. They have one mutual child, and they each have a child that only has them individually as their parents, that they had with a different partner before they met. So it's quite an unusual household, I guess, for the time. And because they are in the arts, they're constantly on the move. The settings in this book are great. You know, you're moving from grand hotel to grand hotel. And there's a rambling country pile as well that features as part of the story. I mean, what's not to like? So, you know, the settings are really fun and engaging. And the family suffers a misfortune. There's a terrible calamity that happens quite early on in the novel, but again, I don't want to ruin it. And at the beginning of the novel, the 3 children, as it were, are adults, and you know, they seem to be in their, I would say, in their 30s. They're not young adults, and they are sitting in a sitting room in this country pile. And they're with this gentleman who declares that they are parasites, and he actually happens to be married to one of them. And they're quite shocked by this concept that they are parasites. But actually, you know, what Daphne du Maurier is doing is she's kind of poking fun at this type of person who lives in this artistic world, in this artistic bubble. And so the novel seems to talk about them with affection, but also with criticism. And I really enjoyed the way that all 3 characters are very strong, very different, have individual voices. The novel is narrated in the first person, and it's always one of the characters talking, but you don't know which one. It's really, I don't know how she pulled that off. It's really clever, and yet they're all distinctly different personalities, and sometimes you eventually work out who it is, and other times you don't necessarily. So from a narrative style point of view, I thought it was really clever. Yeah, I commend this to you. And I know what I was going to say. I love the way that your perspectives on the characters shift and change all the way through the novel. And again, that is not easy to achieve. It's kind of like real life, like the way you meet people and you think one thing and then you think another thing, and then you know them a bit longer and something happens. And so yeah, I thought it was brilliant. And then I don't know why, I don't know whether it was going to Vietnam, but in fact I took this one with me as well, because this is a book that's been on my shelf for quite a long time. And the thing about this novel is that, so it's Kololo Hill by Neema Shah. And this novel is also set in 1972, which I think is where The Mountains Sing. No, Mountains Sing will be slightly earlier than that. But anyway, it's a similar sort of period in modern history. And again, like the Vietnamese War and the Vietnamese boat people, what happened in Uganda with the Asian population of Uganda under Idi Amin in 1972 was something that I remember hearing about when I was a little girl. So again, it's another news story that sort of resonated me because it was something that I kind of knew about as a child but didn't really understand. And I love this novel because it, like The Mountains Sing, it really tells the story of that particular group of people living on Kololo Hill overlooking Kampala. These Asians were invited to Uganda in the first place. The particular family it centres on have had a shop for years, and they've been quite successful. And suddenly, almost overnight, Idi Amin issues this proclamation, and they're given a matter of, I think it's about 6 weeks, to leave the country and go wherever they can. Now, the story focuses on several different characters within the family. It tells the mother's story. It tells the story of the two sons. It's narrated through their eyes, and also the story of the young girl Asha, who is newly married to one of the sons in the family. And that's great because she I suppose she is the central figure in the novel. And she's quite naive, but also quite strong and independent. So she's a good narrative perspective to kind of see things through. And I also was really interested in her mother-in-law, who, again, in some ways defies convention and defies what you might expect of a woman of that time, of her origin, who literally came over to Uganda in a boat from India when she was just newly married. So her story really engaged me. And also I liked the fact that Asha's husband, Pran, is a bit of a chancer. He's mixed up in some quite dodgy dealings. There's an air of sort of, it's not a thriller, but there's tension in the book. And his brother was born with an arm missing. And it was really interesting looking at how that affected his life in Uganda. But then part of the novel is narrated in London in the 1970s. So comparing how he was treated there and how he's treated in London, and maybe a few surprises there for the reader in terms of what actually happens. It was really interesting to read this novel because with the refugee crisis here, if you can call it that, and contemporary attitudes towards refugees in Britain at the moment, I found it fascinating reading about what happened to these people when they actually arrive in London and how they are looked after and handled when they arrive and so on. So yeah, I really enjoyed this. I think, again, it's a really good example of historical fiction, very clearly told, very clearly narrated, no fuss. And then the publishers very kindly sent me Oyinken Braithwaite's Cursed Daughters. Now, her first novel, My Sister the Serial Killer, was shortlisted for the Women's Prize the very first year, I think, that I got really involved. And I absolutely loved it. I wanted it to win. I thought it was an amazing novel. So, and I've read a few of her short stories since and really enjoyed them. So I was really, really, really looking forward to reading this. I'd actually saved it to read on the run-up to reading the Women's Prize for Non-Fiction longlist, which is due to arrive any day now. The big box is coming and I'm very excited for it. But anyway, I thought I want to read some fiction before I dive into that, because that will be 6 or 7 weeks of reading nothing much else than non-fiction, which I know I'll enjoy, but it's a different type of reading sometimes. I'm running out of breath because I don't know why. I've got all the time in the world. Anyway, I loved the premise of this. I really liked it opens with this fantastic scene. It's very disconcerting. It's a young woman walking into the water. And I don't think it's a spoiler to say that she's walking into the water to end her life. And almost sort of at the same time, her sister gives birth to a child who is the spitting image of the woman who dies at the beginning of the novel. So that, that was really quite fascinating. The whole idea of, is it reincarnation? Is it some sort of, spiritual thing? Is it some kind of magic? And I really enjoyed reading about life in Lagos and, the way that young people particularly spend their time in Lagos. I loved that about the novel, but I did find it really disappointing. I think it's way too long. I think it could have been cut down. I thought it was repetitive. I felt a lot of there was a huge cast of characters, which was really quite confusing, and I don't quite know why there needed to be 6 sisters that were cursed. That I found overwhelming, and there's something very naive and a bit adolescent about, for me anyway, and this is just my opinion, about the characters in the novel. They're constantly preoccupied with, what people look like. Every single person that's introduced or walks onto a scene, their physical appearance is described in a way that I just didn't add anything to the storytelling. So yeah, I'm afraid it all fell a little bit flat, and yeah, what a shame. I don't know whether this is a book that has been rushed to publication because of the success of the first one. I don't know enough about the process of putting it together, and maybe if I read it next year or at a different time, sometimes it's about when you pick a book up and read it. But it just didn't seem to be as clever and polished as her first novel. And then I thought, well, I'll read something else that that I've been looking forward to. So I picked up Susan Barker's Old Soul, which again the publishers very kindly sent me some time ago, probably this time last year, I guess. And I really, really loved her novel, The Incarnations. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. But I had to DNF this. It was such a shock. It's really well written. I really liked the writing. But I think it's almost like a horror story. So I don't think it's really my kind of fiction, which is my problem, not the book's problem. But I don't know. I couldn't, the premise of it didn't latch in my head, if you know what I mean. So there's this series of sort of disappearances that seem to be being caused by the same female character who's reappearing in different forms. But it was, again, to me, getting a little bit repetitive. I tried to stick with it. I think I read about 70 odd pages before I gave up. And I think maybe having pushed through Cursed Daughters, I thought, I don't want to do that again. I want to read something that is really galvanizing me. So yeah, this just didn't work for me right now. And maybe I'll come back to it at another point. But yeah, I couldn't. I wasn't interested enough to keep on reading. But my final book of the month, I thought, was an absolute corker. And this is A Burning by Megha Majumdar. And I can't remember when I bought this, but again, it's been on my shelves for a while. My husband keeps saying, what's Claudia Winkleman doing on the front of this book? And that sort of, well, I had to be careful that it didn't spoil the novel for me. So Megha Majumdar is an Indian author, and she this was her first novel, and I think it got quite a bit of attention. She's since recently published another one, and I wish I could remember the title again. It's got a beautiful cover, but I now really want to go and get hold of a copy of that book because I thought this was brilliant. So this is a story. It starts off it's set in Calcutta in India, and it focuses very much around the Kola. Oh, I can't remember the name of it. Kola Bagan slum. The Kola Bagan slum, which apparently is one of the biggest slums in the world. And it opens with a terrorist bombing of a train in which lots of people are killed. The train burns, and it's a really grim scene. And then you jump to this young girl called Jaivan. I just want to make sure I get the names right. I only finished this yesterday or the day before. Names at the moment won't stick with me. Anyway, so Jaivan is this young girl, and she lives in the slum, but she happens to own a phone, and she's literate. She's clever. By some sort of chance opportunity, she's been able to have some schooling. She's been sponsored to go to attend this school, and therefore she's educated. And as a result, she is able to comment on Facebook about the terrorist plot, and her comment is then sort of goes viral, and she is arrested because it means that she is suspected of being involved in the bomb plot, which she isn't. She's completely innocent. And this novel is so rich because one of the things it seems to be asking is, what does a little bit of education do? It can be really empowering, but in the society that we're living in, can it also be really threatening and dangerous? Can it sort of, a little bit of education will take you so far, but it can also lead to all sorts of problems if you're living in a society that is corrupt and dangerous, which is the society that's portrayed in this book. So you've got Jaivan's story, and she's imprisoned, and we explore what happens to her. And then you have the story of PT Sir, who was Jaivan's teacher when she was at school, and he spotted that she was really hungry. He spotted that she had a talent for sport. He encouraged her. He took pity on her. He fed her. He's a very, at the beginning of the novel, he's quite an empathetic character. But the story takes him on a really interesting arc because he gets mixed up in Hindu nationalism and politics. And that takes him on a really interesting journey as well. And all of these characters are manipulating, but being manipulated themselves, which I thought was fascinating. And then the third character is a character called Lovely. And Lovely is a member of the Hijra community in India, which is like a kind of third gender community. And all she wants is to be an actor. She goes to a drama school, and Jivan taught her to read, so she can also read, despite the fact that that she has almost nothing. She lives in real poverty, but she attends these acting classes partly because Jivan, as part of her experience of going to school, is expected to repay that with some sort of community service. So she was picked to teach Lovely English, and again, Lovely is the most fantastic. All three of the characters are really interesting. They all develop and change as the novel progresses, and this is a novel that packs a real punch. It's quite brutal, but there are lots of light moments in it too. It's a novel of real light and shade. I think it's really, the more I think about it, the more sophisticated a novel I think it is. And again, I'm just so glad I stumbled across it and so glad I read it, because although it's set in India, and and it's reflecting politics and society there. This is a story that is being played out. You know, these three people, their stories are being played out all over the world. And to me, that's the power of really good literature, is that it's kind of translatable, as it were. So yeah, I have had a corking reading month in January 2026. Some real highs, some real lows. Please let me know if you've read any of those books, particularly if you've read Cursed Sisters or Old Soul, because, you know, I'd really like to be persuaded that I've missed something, or what have you. I'd love to know if anyone else has read A Burning as well, because it really blew me away, or indeed her more recent novel. I think it only came out this month, but I could be really wrong about that. It could have been this time last year with my little muddle-headed brain. Anyway, everybody, take care. Oh, and before I go, I have a huge apology, because for those of you who watched my video about reading in Vietnam and Cambodia, I don't know what happened to the editing of that video. Somehow the ending is missing, and I really can't tell you why. All I can say is that I think I was trying to edit it with jet lag, so maybe I don't do that again. And also, normally I edit my videos on my phone. For some reason, I chose to do it on the laptop, so maybe I need to steer clear of that as well. But anyway, thanks to those of you who pointed it out, because I wouldn't have had a clue. And I'll try to make sure that the ending of this video appears when you log on to watch it. Anyway, take care. Happy reading, everybody. Bye.